Crime in the province of Mpumalanga over the past decade has centered on either rhino poaching or Eskom corruption. The director for East and Southern Africa, a global initiative against transnational organized crime, says there are deeply embedded criminal networks that have taken root across the province. According to Julian Rademeyer, these pose a significant threat to communities living around the Kruger National Park. For example, Rademeyer says the Chief Mnisi's killing is just the latest in a string of assassinations, and these show just how organized crime is interconnected with politics and business there. Julian Rademeyer joining us now for a chat on this. Julian, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. Let's start with your reaction on the murder of Chief Mnisi. Your thoughts on what may have happened here?
Well, I think that, it's an interesting case in the sense that it's the second murder of two individuals linked to an extensive network of rhino poaching and other organized crime in the province, including extortion, money laundering. There are allegations of involvement in cash and transit heists. So Chief Mnisi is the second person out of a trio of high-profile organized crime figures to have been assassinated. The first was in 2021 with Petros Sidney Mabuza, better known as Mshengu, who was gunned down outside the Lowveld Mall in Hazy View while he was holding court and meeting people in his vehicle. He was shot multiple times and killed. So this one has all the hallmarks of an organized crime hit. You have four gunmen in a BMW X5 armed with apparently AK-47 rifles. They said to Mnisi before they killed him that they'd been looking for him, and now they've got him, and they opened fire and shot him multiple times.
Wow. You say that this bears the hallmarks of an organized crime syndicate. Let's put the context here. So for viewers who may not know, Chief Mnisi arrested in September of 2018. What were the charges against him and those that he was arrested alongside?
So just to go back a little bit, this is an extraordinary story that's been developing over a number of years. You can actually trace the roots back to 2010 when one of Mnisi's co-accused, a former policeman nicknamed Big Joe Joseph Nyalunga, was arrested. There was more than 400,000 rand found in his vehicle, along with traces of rhino horns linked to poachings that occurred in the Kruger National Park. And Nyalunga has since been linked to and was targeted in investigations where he purchased rhino horns from undercover officers. But in police raids on his houses, they found millions of rands, 5 million rand, in fact, stashed away in metal boxes in those houses. They found weapons, they found pangas and knives, they found photographs on a camera that he had showing a young man clearly terrified out of his wits with his hands hog-tied, a jumper cable and batteries in the background and cans of beer. And Mnisi moved in those same circles with someone like Nyalunga and also with Petros Sidney Mabuza. So they were arrested in 2018. They were charged with a variety of charges, including money laundering, racketeering, trading in rhino horns. That case was due to go to trial next month and had actually been set down for 6 weeks on the court roll. I would assume at this stage that it's likely to be postponed. But this demonstrates in many ways how interconnected these criminal groups are, how they're tied into a range of criminal activities, not just simply poaching, but we're looking at cash and transit heists, at extortion, at money laundering, but also how they have developed as people that are looked up to in communities where there's a governance void, where the state is absent, where there's a law enforcement void. Within the communities where both Big Joe, where Mshengu, where Chief Mnisi lived, they were very well respected. Mnisi had a lodge that he built, a nightclub. He hosted some very prominent South African musicians there. They'd almost crafted a role for themselves as respected figures in the communities that they were preying on. And I think, you can see that in statements that have been released today by Mandla Msibi, the controversial Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs MEC from Mpumalanga, also the ANC treasurer, who says that, they're reeling from shock with the assassination of Mnisi, and that this has left a significant void in the institution of traditional leadership in our province. That's an extraordinary statement considering what Mnisi has been accused of being involved in for many years.
Yeah, this is a very well thought through background that you are giving us, Julian. And I'm glad you did that, because the view from people such as the MEC you mentioned, Mandla Msibi, he's the MEC of Kokta in Mpumalanga. Recently, he would have recognized and bestowed official recognition to Chief Mnisi, the person we are talking about who has now been killed. They are going to say that, if anything, this proves just how important it is for traditional leaders to be given state protection. And I remember such an argument on this channel some few weeks ago with an official from Contralesa. How should communities, or who should South Africans believe when the people in the traditional sphere or traditional leadership sphere say chiefs are under attack in South Africa? Who do we believe between your version and the version that's going to come and say what I've just said?
Well, I think, you have to take each case on its merits. I mean, I think it's a fair statement to say that chiefs are under attack. We have very high levels of assassinations in South Africa in many provinces, particularly KwaZulu-Natal, but also increasingly we're seeing a number of hits taking place in Mpumalanga. Mpumalanga over the last decade has had a 42% increase in the murder rate. I think that, in this case, there needs to be a long and hard consideration of what the causes of this particular hit was, why he was targeted. I think it's, again, you have a statement being made by the provincial chairperson of the Provincial House of Traditional Leaders, and also the president of Contralesa, Kgosi Mokoena, saying that Mnisi was the true embodiment of selfless leadership in the community. And his commitment to the well-being of his community was unquestionable. I think the preponderance of evidence that has been offered and that Mnisi would have stood trial for next month certainly raises questions about that commitment and about his role and the role of others in exploiting communities. And I think that, in that case, you also have a role of responsibility for traditional leadership to look at these issues, to look at how, the involvement of someone like this in these various criminal activities.
Yeah, broadly speaking, moving beyond the rhino poaching organized crime, are we winning the war against organized crime syndicates in South Africa?
I think that's an extraordinarily difficult question. I mean, I would say at this point that organized crime poses an existential threat to South Africa, to our democracy. I think that in provinces like Mpumalanga, and this is a long history going back to, you can trace the roots back before Mpumalanga as a province even came into existence, where there's a long history of corruption, of organized crime activity. And over time, as, police have become more corrupt, too afraid, too uninvolved in the communities they're meant to be protecting, where political leadership has become absent, where you've seen the infiltration of organized crime into politics, and, the economics of the province, that in itself becomes very, very intractable. That said, I think that there's been some extraordinary work, for instance, done with very limited resources by the DPCI, the hawks in the province, to crack down on, for instance, cash and transit syndicates. We've seen multiple arrests recently of, more than a dozen people, more than 15 people linked to poaching syndicates through financial investigations. So there are encouraging signs, but this is not an easy challenge. This is not something that is going to be resolved overnight. It's going to take commitment, and it's going to take political leadership, and it's going to take the involvement of us as citizens to try and turn around.
Is this Begicele's war alone, or does it extend beyond what many people are seeing as largely incompetence on his part. And I'm saying, perhaps let's not single him out only. Where is intelligence in South Africa?
Well, I mean, I've spoken to senior police officials, in relation to this research, and you mentioned police crime intelligence, and I fall over laughing, literally. I think there's a massive absence in our intelligence capacity that has not been resolved. I think the efforts, for instance, in other entities like the National Prosecuting Authority to get back on their feet. But this is not something, this is not some nebulous war on crime, which in itself is a fairly pointless exercise. The boots on the ground. We're going to fight a battle with gangsters. This is something that requires targeted solutions. It requires clear strategies to go after criminal networks, to go after the criminal actors who are causing the greatest harms. And it's something that also involves, approach across government. You're looking at much deeper systemic issues in provinces like Mpumalanga, close to 50% unemployment, schools that are not functioning, communities that have been trying to get roads and electricity and water since 1994, being forced to protest and block off roads, for instance, the Kruger National Park, because that's the only way they'll be heard. So there are deep, socio-political issues that need to be addressed that are clearly not being addressed while a clique of criminals, gangsters, politicians and others get wealthy.
I thank you very much for your time. Julian Rademeyer is a director at the East and Southern Africa Global Initiative against transnational organized crime, an existential threat to South Africa's democracy. That's what he says organized crime poses for this country.